A new Australian documentary is going to be released in Australian cinemas from November 9th, a film that screened at the Adelaide Film Festival. And it's a film called Isla's Way. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the writer-director of Isla's Way, Marion Pilowsky. Marion, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter. It's such an honour.
Well, it's lovely to talk to you. And what a fascinating story about Isla and her situation and her friend Susan, etc. It's such a lovely story. How did it all come about?
Well, the cinematographer of the film is actually Isla Roberts, who's the subject of the documentary. It's her grandson. And we had been working together on another documentary on the first day of filming, actually. And I had just come away from the filming realizing that it wasn't something I felt passionate enough about to commit to for a number of years. And I was standing by David's car rather despondently and going, oh, And he said, I really think you should meet my grandmother. I think she's interesting and you might find her interesting. So that's how it came about. And I met her, and I met her a couple of times and I really couldn't get her out of my mind. And then David and I forced my business partner and producer, Georgia Humphreys, to make Isla's Way instead of the other documentary that we'd been working on for 3 or 4 months.
Ah, what an interesting backstory. So tell me about the logistics behind the filming, negotiating with Isla about what she would allow to be filmed, all of that sort of thing.
Well, the great thing about Isla is that she's an absolute open book. She is more than happy to do anything. She's very rarely aware of the camera, apart from that it's another piece of equipment that has to be taken along where we go when we're with her. So, actually in the film, I think she says, okay, have you got the camera? It might as well have been, have you got the spade? Have you got the bag of wheat? Whatever it was. I mean, she's so incredibly unself-conscious. Um, she's 87 years old and she lives in the Adelaide Hills with her girlfriend of 40 years, Susan. Although Isla insists that she's not a lesbian, Susan is. And so it became a kind of story about extraordinary people living an ordinary life and identity, and older women, how they live the last, well, she's 88 now, so the last chapter of their lives. Mm.
Fascinating story, and it's so great to document this in your film. It's so marvelous. How easy was it for you to get production behind you and financing, all of that sort of thing, to be able to make this feature documentary?
Mm. Well, I think like many documentaries, you just start and you think you'll work out where you're going to get the money from as you progress, and that's pretty much what we did. We had an executive producer who's based in Los Angeles, who I was asking some advice about raising some funds for it, and he just immediately said, "Well, I'll put some money in." And so his funds enabled us to get to the edit, and then during the edit, I asked the Adelaide Film Festival to come in and have a look at some clips, and also Wallace Cinemas, and they both committed. Adelaide Film Festival committed to some completion money, and Wallace Releasing committed to releasing the film. But it's kind of interesting because when you watch the film, you can see at the beginning we're often using an iPhone, or the camera's a little bit wobbly, and then as we get funding, the equipment gets better and better as we go along. So we get another camera and we get beautiful tripods and we get a drone, and yeah, gets a bit slicker as you progress through the film.
Fair enough. No, that's fine. And you obviously had a small crew working with you because, and there's some beautiful shots and all that sort of thing. So, and I noticed it was shot over a year.
Mm. Well, yeah, once we decided we were going to make a documentary about Isla, I wanted to have, because there was no story, as it were, because I was going to just follow her. I felt I needed a kind of structure to kind of, scaffold over the production. And I chose seasons, the 4 seasons. So we started filming on the 1st of December 2021, and we went right through the seasons to the end of, what's that, November the 30th, 2022. That's right. And so we started post-production, kind of towards the end of filming, and we were in post for about 6 months. But the reason I wanted to do that over the seasons was that I had been gifted this very beautiful book by a babysitter when I was about 9 or 10, maybe younger, actually, maybe 7 or 8, called Katie One Summer. And Katie One Summer followed this little girl on a New Zealand farm over the course of a summer. And it was shot by a environmental photographer called Guy Mannering. He's passed away since then. And I just loved it. I loved every single thing about it. I loved the world that he built. I loved the cover of the book. I loved everything. And that was kind of reference material that I gave to David, the cinematographer, and also films like Truffle Hunter, where, I'm a real adherent to the frame, where, the world is existing in the frame. And, if you don't have to move the frame, don't. So we had a crew of, I don't know, I sidetracked then, didn't I? We had a crew of 3, really. Me, David, and Georgia Humphreys, the producer. Yeah,
Oh,
that was it.
a lean, mean
And Christian
machine.
Ledbetter, our editor, obviously.
Ah, of
Yeah,
course. Yes, I'm going
yeah.
to ask you about editing shortly, but what a terrific process and so on. And
Mm,
tell me about the actual filming, because there were some occasions when I noticed you're filming amongst horses and amongst a whole range
mm,
of different environmental challenges to some extent. I suppose
mm.
there were some challenges along the way.
Well, I mean, I'm not a country person, I should say that. So it was kind of very eye-opening for me. And thank God it was Isla, because nothing phases her. But we took her back to her marital home, which is 190 kilometers north of Port Lincoln. And then you drive down a dirt track for an hour from a town called Lock into the Bascombe Well Conservation Park to her marital home, which was Bascombe Well, now designated a ruin. So she hadn't been back for 60 years. So that was a bit of a shock. But as we drove out there with her brother, yeah, we got lost, and there's a drone shot of where we get lost. I mean, it's literally in the middle of nowhere. It's absolute scrubland. I mean, yeah, I don't know how we made it out of there, but we did. Mm.
Ah, the glamour of filmmaking. It's how interesting to hear that. And also along the way, as you said, Isla is an open book and so on, but there must have been some occasions when Isla, perhaps Susan or whoever, because there are some other people you talked to, said, I'd rather that this wasn't in the film, or can you reshoot this or whatever. Were there occasions like that?
Nobody ever asked for a reshoot, ever. I think I find country people very unconcerned and unworried about their presence on screen, which I loved. People are just so natural and real. I would say that occasionally Susan found the film crew and the camera, got a little bit tired for her occasionally, being under scrutiny. Isla didn't mind at all. There were never any instances. The only time there was some uh, I wouldn't say problem, but maybe a little bit of pushback, which is right at the beginning of the film. I put it right at the start, where I ask her about her sexual orientation and her relationship with Susan. And I think for an 87-year-old woman, who grew up in a country, Eyre Peninsula, um, nobody's ever asked her about that before. And she doesn't necessarily articulate it, but she acknowledges it and it's fine. Move on. Not in an abrupt way, just
Yeah.
like, I'm not a lesbian, I'm not anything, I'm just Isla. Mm.
which a
Yeah.
lovely statement in the film that she's so natural, and
Mm,
so I love her
mm,
reactions. They're just fantastic. So yes, let's talk
mm.
about the editing process, because over a year you've obviously got so much footage, and the
Yeah.
most difficult part of any documentary in particular is editing. How challenging was
Mm.
that process?
Well, I found it very fascinating, actually, in the end. And we shot for about 40 odd days over the course of the year. And we had 150 hours of footage because David would also shoot some footage, if we weren't there and there was like Christmas, for example,
Hmm.
which we use in the film. And Christian and I just made a kind of a roadmap on cards about what we felt the story arcs and the journeys were, and tried to follow that. But what happened was about halfway through the edit, we were using a device which I realize now I was using as a kind of almost like a binky, a comforter for the film, which was a number of talking heads because it was just so overwhelming. And then I realized one night, this is not the film I set out to make. This is not that kind of, quiet worlds in a still frame and people discovering Isla for herself. And so overnight, I had this kind of massive epiphany and woke up the next day and went to the editor and said, Christian, I just want to take out every single talking head in the film and just see what we have. And that took 35 minutes out of the film. Yeah. And I felt so much happier. It was just so much better. I guess it's, in narrative terms, sometimes you have a huge amount of voiceover, don't you?
Yes.
And,
Yes.
does the film work if you take out the voiceover? Well, I suppose the analogy is, would our film work without talking heads? Which I feel it does. And I didn't want to have any text on the screen, saying who people were. It's just too complicated. I just wanted people to go along with her on her year, really. Mm,
Mm. Fair enough. Fair enough. No, it all works very smoothly, and it's almost that fly on the wall style of filmmaking
mm,
that you're there. The
mm.
audience is there to observe and to make their own judgments, if you like.
Judgments. Mm,
Yeah, yeah.
mm.
Excellent stuff. So I'm intrigued to ask you this question: how did Isla and Susan respond to the final version of the film?
Well, they did not see the film until the opening night world premiere at the Adelaide Film Festival.
Ah,
That was the first time they had seen the film, and I was sitting in front of them and terrified, obviously, about their reaction, which, by the sounds I were hearing was very positive. And then afterwards we went on stage, and the first question that was asked by the moderator was to Isla, what did you think of the film? And she took the microphone very confidently, as she always is, and just said, fucking beautiful. And that was it. So yeah, she was happy.
it's great to hear. Oh,
It was a very Isla response.
it
Yeah.
is. Yes, yes. She tells it like it is. She's very, very straight down the line.
Mm.
I like that sort of. What about Susan though? How did she respond?
I think for Susan, it was probably a little bit more complex. Susan is a very, very different person from Isla, even though they get along incredibly well and have, you know, um, just such fun together, and there's such affection and love for each other. But Susan comes from a completely different world and has much more awareness about how things can be perceived. I think she thought it was great too. I just think it took a little bit of time for her to process everything, and we've had a few conversations afterwards, and she becomes more and more positive as she thinks about it. So that's very satisfying for me. Mm,
Absolutely, I can absolutely understand that. Now, I know the film is releasing in Australian cinemas November 9th, but I mean, getting any
mm,
films released, especially Australian films, is not always easy. How easy was it to get the
mm.
film out there?
Well, this is the first film that Wallace Cinemas is putting out under their new distribution division, which is called Wallace Releasing. And Manda Flett and David Simpson, who run that, saw the film, as I said, and just felt that they could find an audience for it, that there was a vastly underserved audience of older women and older men, particularly in the rural and regional communities. And so it's going out to, I have my little list here, it's going out to a lot of regional cinemas, as well as the Wallace Circuit in South Australia, but also to places like the Silver City Cinema in Broken Hill and the Showbiz Cinemas in Swan Hill, in Victoria, the Mac in Mansfield, that's in Victoria, but also Victor Harbour and Roxby Downs and Port Augusta and Port Lincoln, as well as urban sites. So they feel very confident. We've got a beautiful trailer. They love the trailer. Beautiful poster, all the kind of assets that they need to make, to communicate to their audience that this film is for them. But also, it's going to the Melbourne Queer Film Festival. It's been invited to the Antenna Documentary Film Festival. So it seems to speak to Australian cinema programmers and festival programmers, which is also very rewarding. Mm.
Absolutely. I think that's terrific. That's great to see that happening, and I suppose a lot of those cinema releases will have Q&As attached to them, perhaps, and which of course furthers the interest in a film.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we went to Mildura last week, and we were warned, oh, there'll probably only be about 6 or 10 people here, and I don't care how many people come. They've paid their money, and parked their car and probably gone out for dinner as well. I want to make sure that I respect that. But there were 60 people there. So that was a shock and a brilliant screening, and they really responded well to it. They're just local Mildura residents.
Terrific. Well, it's a lovely story, and I can see how it would speak to a lot of people. And so far as here is this woman who's in her 80s, who's living her life and doing it her way, which is fantastic. So, Marion, I'm quite intrigued. I notice you've produced some films and television shows. You've done short films and so on. How do you decide what you get involved with?
Well, alongside my partner, business partner and creative partner, Georgia Humphreys, we have a production company called Corner Table Productions. And we have a few rules about what goes on our slate. But the most important rule is one of us has to be a champion of it. It's okay for the other person to be, maybe not as in love with, but one of us has to be truly in love with the project, because you have to spend so much time, that you have to develop it for years sometimes. And you just need to have that motivation of love for the thing that you're going to spend the majority of your time doing. So that's our major rule. And then our second rule is that, we try and make things that we feel an audience will want. And we consider ourselves the audience as well. So, yeah. Although I don't want to make horror films that have lots and lots of gore, I have to say. I don't think I could ever champion one of those. Too squeamish.
Fair enough. You have to set boundaries somehow. So I understand. I could just see a sequel, Isla's Horror Show. She gets involved in violence. No, of course not. I'm joking. Okay.
It could have easily gone that way, I have to say.
In
some moments, I tell you. Yeah.
The wonders of filmmaking is, especially when you don't know where it's going and making a documentary, you never know what can happen.
Never know.
Anyway, it's ended up really well, so congratulations on that. So I'm wondering what your next projects might be, including that documentary that you had started working on and then left it behind to make Isla's Way.
That documentary will not be completed. Had a beautiful title, A is for Apple, but we will not be making A is for Apple. As much as we love the title, I can't do something because I love a title, although, I'm often tempted to. The next thing we have is we are going into development on a psychological thriller, a 4 by 1 hour psychological thriller,
Ah,
uh, a female-led psychological thriller, which will be lots of fun, I hope. And we're also working on a Irish Australian co-production of an adaptation of a Maeve Binchy short story. Maeve Binchy wrote Circle of Friends. Um, she's kind of like a quiet feminist, so we lean towards that stuff. And yeah, that's what we're currently working on.
sound like really good projects. I wish you well with making all of those. So congratulations. And I'll just leave you perhaps with the last question, Marion. I love asking all filmmakers. Have you seen any other films, TV shows, whatever, of late that has impressed you?
Well, I watch a huge amount of TV, huge. So I'd have to think because I watch so much I forget the titles. But I saw Poor Things at the Adelaide Film Festival, which I just loved it. I mean, it was just so intriguing and fascinating and different. And I hope Mark Ruffalo gets a nomination because his performance is incredible. From the TV side of things, oh gosh, um, I just watched so much. It's terrible. I feel bad that I can't just immediately pick 5 things. What was the one I watched recently that was a scripted retelling of a very famous British crime case? Oh, there's so many.
Don't worry.
I just can't remember.
That's fine. I'm glad you mentioned Poor Things. It's a film I'm looking forward to seeing, and Yorgos Lanthimos is an incredible
Oh,
filmmaker. Yeah.
yeah, such an auteur, such a visionary. Yeah, love, love, love his work.
Okay. And we certainly get want the audience to love your film, uh, Isla's Way.
Not necessarily go and see Poor Things, but they should. They'd enjoy it as well.
I'm sure. And we've been speaking to the writer-director of Isla's Way, Marion Pilowsky. Marion, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you so much, Peter. Absolute delight.
All the best. Bye-bye.